Good morning, everyone. Nice to see you on this Northern Tip morning. Northern Tip is a Wuyi mountain cliff tea. That's what we'll be focused on today. But as usual, I must start off with the interesting or unusual or exciting things that have occurred in the shop this week. And there have been several. So as I'm trying to figure out which one is the most exciting, I don't think that that's very hard. I'll start right off with the most exciting. So I believe it was Thursday afternoon. We were very busy. We were closed in the shop. And I hear this knock on the door. And I was so delighted to see Scott Wentworth at the door, up and around, moving around, good color. Really a remarkable recovery in such a short amount of time. So that was the most exciting thing that I saw this week. Now, in terms of things that I read, something that was truly remarkable, and it's hard to get your arms around. It's hard for me to get my arms around it. In Zhejiang Province, so think Shanghai and think to the west a little bit. It's in that same geographical area. They discovered ruins which seem to date back to about 9,000 years ago. And wow, what did they discover within these ruins? Apparently signs of cultivated tea. So that's a long time ago for tea to have been cultivated. And I think it changes everybody's idea, or at least modifies a bit everybody's idea about cultivation of tea. And so, when we talk about ancient tree here, and you think, well, stuff was being cultivated apparently 9,000 years ago. Should this be really true, there may be some ancient trees that are still yet to be undiscovered. There clearly are ancient trees that are still yet to be undiscovered in Southwest China. Southwest China, particularly Yunnan, is so isolated in some areas that they clearly are discovering. It would be really exciting if all of a sudden they discovered something that was 4,000 or 5,000 years old. It would be truly amazing. So that was a kind of interesting thing that I read this week. So let's move towards cliff teas. Before we can get both feet in the cliff tea arena, let's talk about something that you frequently, when you're in the shop, hear the tea master refer to. And in Chinese, there's a way of saying this, and the literal meaning is drink other teas, taste Wulong, cliff teas. So what's the real meaning behind that? And what is the implied meaning that goes along with that? So one of the things that you realize, of course, is when you're drinking other teas, they're almost uniformly at a lower temperature than the cliff teas. The cliff teas need that 200 degrees or so heat in order to bring out all the flavors. In so doing, you can't just sip and drink it down in 2 or 3 gulps. Won't happen, cannot happen. Whereas when you're drinking green tea or you're drinking white tea or red teas, done anywhere from 165 up to about 180, that you can consume much quicker. And typically you do consume much quicker. So this concept of tasting has that as an obvious meaning. What are the implications of that? From a Chinese perspective, and remember, Gongfu cha, Gongfu tea, that is small cup tea, developed not in the green tea growing regions. They developed in the cliff tea regions and then actually went to the south where oolong teas grew as well. So that would be in Anxi and in Canton Province. And different styles of gong fu or small cup tea developed. And so what again was the objective? The objective as you were drinking this tea was to appreciate different layers of flavor, different layers of consistency, and different layers of aroma. So let's switch to Japan for a moment. Now, some of you are probably already beginning to form the thought, oh no, he's going to say something about Wulong tea in Japan. The answer is no. What I am going to talk about briefly is think of the Japanese tea ceremony. The Japanese tea ceremony demands your full attention. And as such, the way it developed with your full attention, as such, you learned to appreciate tea in a certain way. Well, the gong fu tea methodology and this concept of actually appreciating the tea gradually developed the same way. That's not to say that the Japanese tea ceremony is exactly the same as the Chinese tea ceremony. In fact, it isn't. However, the sensibility of slowness, the sensibility of step-by-step appreciating the tea, that is a common trait that's shared. And I think for Westerners, as soon as you think about that, so the Japanese tea ceremony, can you have the Japanese tea ceremony? Would you be able to do something like that in a chain? No. Could you do something like that in a temple? Possibly, because it would be a dedicated space. You could arrange it in such a way so that the entire environment was consistent with you understanding and taking the time to understand the tea. This is the same thing that's meant by this sense of tasting Wulong. And the tools were developed to do that. Now, of course, here we've done something different, haven't we? We have moved from small cup to large cup, but that's only a manifestation of a way for Westerners to have an easier time to enjoy the tea. That we have not changed the sense of the importance of actually going through the steps to really appreciate the tea and to understand the tea and to also think about what environment to appreciate the tea. All of these are really, really important. And even more so from a cultural tradition for the cliff teas. This cultural tradition question, which we'll touch on, there's quite a few things about it we'll touch on today, comes clashing with modernity, doesn't it? Because as society modernizes, things change. And as things change, speeds alter. And as speeds alter, ways of appreciating the taste, ways of appreciating products change. And so there's a clash with that. And that clash occurs not only in terms of tea, it occurs with every sort of artisanal product. Wine is the same. There are no exceptions to this rule. And we'll talk a little bit more how specifically that's changing in China and how that's affecting what kind of conflict that's creating. All right, so let's go ahead then and really dig into Northern Tip. We've talked about the fact that cliff teas really started sometime in the late 1500s. Probably you had prototypes as early as around 1580, something in that area. You didn't really have a lot of information on it until the early 1600s. But as scholars go back and to dig into records, there's more and more evidence that it really began in the late 1500s, and the process, that is, of cliff teas. Of all the tea processes in China, this is the most complicated. And it's the most complicated.
Pardon the interruption, hang on, folks.
Excuse me a second.
One little moment here. Rob, I see you, great comment. I will share that with John in a moment.
All right. Okay, I'm sorry about that. So we're doing the cliff teas. We're talking about the complication of the cliff teas.
We stopped around 1600 in the development of processing.
Thank you. And in 1600, the development of processing, and that processing was at the start probably 20 to 30 steps. And today, the most traditional is 20 to 30 steps. Does everybody follow the most traditional? And the answer is no. There are some farmers who take shortcuts, and those farmers have less of a product than those who have the more traditional ways of doing things. So the more traditional ways of doing things are completely by hand. Now, does this mean that when they convert to doing some of it by machinery, it can't be good? No, that's not what I'm saying. But if they become industrial and do all the steps by machinery, that's just not going to be as good. Can farmers who have plots that are 1/4 of an acre or even 2 or 3 acres really commit to industrial processing? No, they cannot. They absolutely cannot commit to industrial processing. Too expensive. So it's only the larger farmers. And so let's think about, again, about the Wuyi Mountains and who are the majority of farmers. There are only 3, to the best of our knowledge, larger companies in the Wuyi Mountains. And they, from the best of our knowledge, may have up to 50, 60 acres of production. And all the rest are individually owned farms. So that means that the bulk, especially from the best locations, comes from these areas and is being processed, a combination of hand process, in some cases totally hand processed, and machine process. So where is it the most important when you get a machine involved? So if you are actually trying to bruise the leaves, getting a machine involved saves a lot of labor. So that's one area farmers have tended to actually spend some time or some money doing, because they save a lot of time. And as you save time as a farmer, then you look around and you also ask yourself, I'm saving time. I can get a little bit more through. Maybe I should buy my neighbor's leaves if they're not going to process or they're not going to pick all the leaves. So you have that situation going on as well. So you have a complicated set of situations in regards to the leaves and in regards to which farmers are doing what. So it's not at all straightforward as you might expect. We haven't really talked much about this before, and that's why I wanted to do this today, because when you walk through the Wuyi Mountains, you get one sort of impression about the small plots. On some of these small plots, there are signs which seem to be advertising tea companies. As it turns out, most of those are signs that are finding their way into these plots, and they're purchasing the advertising space there, but they don't own those plots. Some farmers allow their tea, not every year, to grow, and they don't pick it. Some farmers go to a local market and pick up other farmers' tea leaves. And so the result is they're able to process more. In the Wuyi Mountains, there's one pick only. That's a spring pick. You almost never get any other picks within the Wuyi Mountains. And that's by agreement, because they're trying to protect the environment. And it's also driven by economics, because the economics are so wonderful. And what do I mean wonderful? They're making good money. So the result is, particularly within the very famous regions, all the within the mountain. So that's that 7.7 square kilometer area. That entire area, those farmers are all wealthy, because everybody realizes that that's where the most magical teas come from. Well, how do they realize this? Is it everybody's tasted teas from all over the Wuyi Mountains? No, part of this is cultural. Part of it is historical. So in the Yuan dynasty, around 1302, the emperor established a tribute plant in that area. And historically, after that, that became the area. That was the most famous area. And so culturally, hey, I want my tea from within the mountain. So when you have fame, so let's think about France for a moment. You have the Bordeaux region or the Champagne region. And you think of getting a really, really good champagne, bottle of champagne. Where do you think first? Okay, I got to make sure that the recipient recognizes that this is a great champagne. I better get it from this region, because you can only print the label from this region and use that term from this region. And the person getting it, oh my God, this is the real deal. Same with within the mountain, in the Wuyi Mountains. And so that gives you that cachet. We'll talk about that in a minute. Yes.
What is the name of that within the mountain area?
So the name of within the mountain is simply Zheng'an. So I've just translated it, and it means the real cliff tea. And I extrapolate that and say, or the real rock tea is what I should really say, or the real rock is the literal meaning of that, within the mountain. And was that area always defined the way it is now? And the answer is no. It used to be much smaller, or considerably smaller. Used to be about 4 square kilometers. So how long ago was it only 4 square kilometers? About 50 or 60 years ago, it was only 4 square kilometers. But as the tea industry changed and more emphasis was on production, that area gradually grew larger. And actually, from a terroir perspective, it wasn't inappropriate for it to grow larger. All right, everybody's thirsty, and we're going to do things a little differently. this morning. The tea master has turned over the entire explanation today to me. So I'm gonna brew the tea and I'm gonna demonstrate it first and then you'll brew with me. So I'm stepping outside the camera just simply to get that 200-degree water, heat the pot.
Who changed that or expanded that designation beyond the originally smaller designated area?
Great question. So the questioner asked, did the farmers all band together, realizing that if they got a bigger area, that more of them could become fabulously rich? Were they responsible for changing within the mountain appellation? And the answer is no. It was a combination of local government along with tea industry people, because again, culturally, especially in the beginning, so in the 70s, China is beginning to change the way business is done in China. They're beginning to encourage small farmers. They're beginning to encourage private enterprise. And so the result is, as the demand is beginning to outstrip what is available. And by the way, at that time, you could actually use that appellation. You could say, on your packaging, Zhengyan. However, at some point later, I don't know the exact year, but I'm pretty sure it was in the late 80s, early 90s, the Chinese started to forbid farmers from putting Zhengyan on their packaging. And the reason being the LCSs, because the Chinese were realizing, hey, wait a minute, tea from other places is hitting the market. How do we know this? Because the amount of tea on the market from, in quotes, in the mountain, that exceeds what's really grown there. Where's this other stuff coming from? So there was an entire issue with that. And the result was, at some point, the government, the tea industry, they all said, yeah, the tea from within the 7.7 square kilometer area is all really good tea. And as such, we'll say that that's all within the mountain. So that's how that occurred. All right, so I have the 200-degree water in the cup. I'm sorry, the pot. You can use either ceramic or Yixing. We use Yixing here. Timing is different for each of these. Heat up the cup. And in fact, I'm gonna do that again to make this a little bit smoother for you. And when we heat the pot, we're in a way here, it's easy for us to also heat the exterior. Do you have to do that? No. Will you make a better cup of tea? The answer is probably. Not probably, certainly will. All right, so I'm gonna take my northern tip, make sure that the plate pot is completely empty, which it wasn't, a little water left over. I'm gonna empty the leaves into the pot carefully. And I'm going to shake the pot. And I always smell. The smell lets me know that I'm on target. I've used the right leaves. And then I'm going to add the 200-degree water.
our steeping times on this?
For the clay pot, let's see. I have forgotten what I've written. Whatever I wrote in the email is the appropriate time. I believe it is a 3-minute steep for this. We'll look at that for a second.
Interesting. Yes, 3 minutes.
2 minutes.
Then 2 for the second. Thanks, Aggie.
Okay.
So great, interesting comment from a participant from earlier when you were talking about tea rhythm and, you know, the nexus between the culture of tea and tea that requires time and doesn't lend itself for true appreciation to mass production or chains. And Rob said, this reminds him of photography, short exposure photography, which can capture things that happen on short time scales, and long exposure photography, which captures things on long time scales. So consider the longer exposure photos, months to years, done by the photographer Michael Wesley. It's fascinating, but the pacing of tea reminds Rob of this.
That's a very interesting and thoughtful comment. So Rob is talking about the difference between long exposure and drawing an analogy to tea appreciation. And that's really a useful analogy because you're right. If you're in a hurry, and if you're in a hurry with photography, you're going to get one sort of exposure, aren't you? And you're going to get one sort of result versus if you actually set it up, take the time to get another type of result. And this is a really good analogy because these results aren't by accident. And when we're brewing and when we're appreciating, taking the appropriate time, having the appropriate setting is really, really important. And Chinese culturally, especially in regards to the cliff teas, are all over this particular aspect. And they're all over it from a small cup perspective. Remember, the Chinese aren't doing this. They're doing the small cup. So the little 3-ounce cups, that's what they're doing. But it's the same principle because they got to get the right aroma. They got to get the right flavor. There are rules as you're doing the small cup. And if you violate those rules, you're not going to get the good end result that you're hoping for. Yes.
Speaking of photography, what is the name of the river and the mountain in the photos you sent? Fascinating.
Name of the river within the mountains in the photos is called the Nine Bend River. Really an interesting, timer has gone off, an interesting, fun place to take a raft trip. And when we take customers, we almost always take them down the river. All right, so timer's gone off. You're not in a huge hurry, but deliberately pour the tea out. Not trying to create a bunch of bubbles.
Northern tip is from Northern Fujian, right? Hence a cliff tea, question mark?
So the stated facts are correct. The implications are not. So yes, Northern tip is a Wuyi Mountain Northern Fujian tea, but that's not why it's called Northern tip. All right, so this is the color you should get from this tea. You note that this is a little darker. Let's enter the quality arena and figure out what we're looking at here. So right away, aroma will tell you one thing, the aroma of the tea liquor. I'm going to smell the tea leaves. I'm going to actually look at them. and smell. And remember, this is 200 degrees. So this needs a different approach than a 175 or a 170 degree smell, because you have to be careful. You don't want to inflame your nasal passages. Okay. And remembering that when you take the sip of this, it's an inhalation, a 200 degree inhalation. So you're going to be careful. You're going to coat your tongue, and you're going to try and get a sense of astringency. You're going to see if there's any bitterness in it. You're going to figure out where in your mouth is having a reaction. And then you're going to think about the aftertaste as you swallow. Lastly, there'll be energetics associated with this, especially for some people, relatively quickly for some, relatively slowly for others. For some, it'll be very obvious. For others, it'll be almost negligible. So don't worry. You can be anywhere on that scale and you're fine. So let me take a little smell. Sip. Okay, and I'm going through the process of trying to figure out where in my mouth I'm feeling this. Not really focused on taste right now. I'm really focused just on mouth reactions. I'm focused on, is the body of this dense? Is it light? Those are the things that I'm really focused on. I'm thinking about the aftertaste. I'm detecting an aftertaste with this. I'm going to take a second one. Okay, I have my sense of what the quality aspects of this are, and you are going to brew along with me. So let's talk about what tool you're going to use. If you're using a clay pot, then it is 3 minutes for this steep, unless you have the special clay pot. If you have the special clay pot, dial that back to 2 minutes. Normally, for the special clay pot, you would also reduce the number of grams, but in this particular case, don't do it. Just dial back on the timing for the special pot. If it is a ceramic a mug or pot, then do it for 3.5 minutes. So let's make sure that your brewing receptacle is empty, which I'm doing right now. And I'm going to make sure I clean this out. While I'm doing that, heat yours up. 200 degree water would be best. Make sure that your cup is heated. Again, I'm making real sure that there's no leftover leaves in here. That's looking good. Get another cup here.
So as a follow-up question to this prior participant's question, are all Wulong teas from Northern Fujian falling under the category of a cliff tea?
So the questioner asked the following: are all Oolong teas from Northern Fujian cliff teas? And I have to answer this as no. And the reason being, let me modify this. This is not saying no. Instead, let me say it this way. All Wulongs from the Wuyi mountain region are cliff teas, period. So by saying Northern Fujian, that's too generalized. And that's why you have to be really, really careful with that. But all teas from the Wuyi Mountains, yes, they're cliff teas. All right, so you've made sure that your cup is completely clean. You're going to drain this water. And what we do here is we heat the pot with it. You're going to set your timer for the appropriate time, depending on which receptacle you're using. And you're going to get bag number 1 labeled Northern Tip. You'll pour any water that was extra out. And then you're going to put the tea leaves into the pot. You do this carefully because you want to get every leaf in there if possible and not on your tea tray or in your sink. And you'll add 200-degree water to this. Now I always smell mine early on because I want to make sure it is the right tea in there. And it is. Okay, you fill that pot up and you hit your timer. Okay, and we've been talking about this confluence or this change within the Wuyi Mountains over the last 40 or 50 years. So what I was talking about was that you had relatively steady production until 1978. So how much tea is coming from the Wuyi Mountains compared in 2018, for example, compared to what it was in 1978? There's 6 times as much production in those 40 years. So it's increased dramatically. Why? Because there's so much pressure on getting this type of tea. In other words, the tea literati, the people in the know, the people who are drinking high quality tea in China know that the cliff teas are out of this world. Now, historically, who else knew that these teas were out of this world? The British, the Dutch, anybody who was importing from China so-called bohea, B-O-H-E-A-T. That meant it came from Northern Fujian, the Wuyi Mountain area. And so in Britain especially, and in Russia, in the 17 and 1800s, bohea tea was top choice, absolutely top choice. All right, so this is the pressure that created more land to come under cultivation. Plus the Chinese themselves started to allow and encourage farmers to expand their plots and to grow more tea. So that's one thing that happened. At the same time, remember, the Wuyi Mountains became a World Heritage Spot. As it became a World Heritage Spot, the rules associated with that. And so one of the rules is no manufacturing within that area. And so by manufacturing here, there mean anything aside from tea manufacturing, limited use of pesticides and no pesticides that aren't certified under the organic label. So there's really strict rules. And in addition, the farmers and the local government, because this is such a beautiful area, came together in agreement that, hey, we're not going to allow anything to spoil our livelihood. All right. So your timer's gone off if you're using a Nishing pot, and you're pouring the tea out of the pot into the cup, not trying to create a bunch of bubbles. Making sure you get every last drop out so you can get that second steeping successfully.
The dry leaves a commentator says the dry leaves have the aroma of make her think about flavors. So the scent of the dry leaves has an aroma that makes her think about flavors like an umami, dark chocolate, and pockets of sweetness in between the leaves.
Umami, pockets of sweetness, and dark chocolate in the smell. This was the dried leaves. Yes, of the dried leaves. Why do I like this comment? And how would I have changed it if I had said it myself? I like this comment because I think it does include all those elements. I would have changed the order because I think the umami is the least obvious and the chocolate and the sweetness are more obvious, but all of them are there. So I love the comment, just would have reversed the order a little bit, but great catch.
The commentator also gets that it smells clean, fresh, and bright.
This is a brilliant comment because commentator leads off with clean. You know, pre-Sophie's, none of you probably ever thought to use the term clean. And you certainly didn't think about the implications of that. Now, you're using it in a very appropriate way. It is clean and it is fresh. And it's clean, fresh, and what was the other one?
Clean, fresh, and a brightness.
Brightness, yes. Clean, fresh, and bright. A great summation of the flavor of this.
Another commentator also catches dark chocolate, and another notes as soon as she put the leaves in the pot, there was this wonderfully enticing aroma that was emitted, and the heated leaves gave her a sense of chocolate and floralness, whereas the heated dry leaves, chocolate and floralness, wet leaves, fresh and vegetal.
So, love this comment. Heated dried leaves, floral and chocolate. The wet leaves, vegetalness and fresh. Love this comparison because it just goes to show everyone that there really are significant differences by varietal thinking about wet and dry leaves. And this goes back to this thought that we were talking about in the beginning. You taste Wulong. Well, what does that taste really consist of? It starts with the leaves. And so the taste, especially the way Xiaobei uses that, ping, Wulong, that ping, that taste really encompasses everything that you're doing, which is catching it from the leaves, both wet and dry, and then proceeding to understand what this tea is about. Great catch on that.
Another taster gets chocolate from the warm leaves, and somebody else notes that she gets like a lightly roasted grassy hay taste off of the presumably wet leaves.
So chocolate,
or actually, sorry, off the tea liquor, lightly roasted grassy hay.
Roasted grassy hay off of the tea liquor. The chocolate was off of the leaves. We're getting some themes here. And so one theme for sure is chocolate. There is that sense of that chocolatiness. And whether you taste a sweetness or not with it, that chocolate seems to predominate everything. And your comments are really spot on. The other theme that's going to start to arise even more was captured by the second comment, a roastiness. The second commentator said, like a hay that's slightly roasted. Whether you sense it as a hay or some other material, the roastedness will become a comment that I think we'll see more and more of.
Taster says there's a kind of a sweet minerality in the scent of the wet leaves. A sweet minerality in the scent of the wet leaves.
A sweet minerality in the scent of the wet leaves. Love this. This is a cliff tea. I ask you this, can you get away from minerality? And the answer is no. So you guys are, all of you, that is, are capturing that minerality. It starts in the aroma. And all cliff teas, to either a lesser or greater degree, have something to do with minerality, especially if they come from within the mountain.
On this same theme, another taster, whereas this one taster was talking about the sweet minerality and the scent of the wet leaves, this taster is saying she guessed that in the tea liquor itself. The tea liquor is sweet. Minerality comes through as well.
Tea liquor is sweet, according to this commentator, and a sense of minerality. Now, when is the last time that you've had a tea that's sweet and has minerality? It's hard to get them outside of cliff teas. The cliff teas inherently have the minerality because of where they grow and the specialness of the terroir up there. And these varietals, and particularly this varietal, does have that sweetness that's going on. And it's not a sugary sweetness. It's a sweetness almost, I want to say it's a malty sweetness. And I love the fact that you're all picking up on this.
Taster says the tea liquor has this nice butter caramel scent. And if he were blindfolded, he would say it's either an Wulong or buttery popcorn.
All right. A buttery sweet caramel sense to this. And the commentator made the following comment, said that if there was a blindfold on it would either be a Wulong or buttery popcorn. So the implied point here, which I love, is also that there's a substance to the tea liquor in your mouth. There is a density or a viscousness that has that flavor and leaves it in your mouth. Yeah.
Another notes, the sweet minerality reminds her of the taste of aluminum. I can't say I've ever tasted aluminum. If I did, it was by accident. But okay, sweet minerality reminds her of the taste of aluminum. Are there studies on the soil versus the liquor minerality? Pardon me? Are there studies on the soil versus liquor minerality or the chemical constituents?
Okay, so a lot going on in this comment. So the commentator says a sweetness that reminds them of aluminum, tasting aluminum. And then the second part of that comment is, or the question really, is are there studies which link areas and their chemical soil constituents with the end result from a taste perspective?
And also an analysis of the constituents of the tea liquor.
As well as a chemical analysis, thank you, of what's in the tea liquor. So let's break that question apart, because there are very good studies individually. So what do I mean by that? There's great studies on this soil composition within the Wuyi Mountains and the various areas of the Wuyi Mountains. Very great studies on those, lots of them. The studies of the chemical constituents in the tea liquor itself, there are quite a few. However, they don't usually point back to the soil. And instead, they usually point towards process. This is really interesting because this questioner is making an assumption, and the starting point is different for this questioner, that the chemicals in the soil are making the taste of this. In China, most of the studies that I see, it's the chemicals in the tea leaf along with the processing modality make both the chemicals and the taste. And it's really interesting that we're having this discussion, because when thinking about what to present this morning, I had so many different directions I could go. And one of the things I was looking at was the effect of roast on astringency, the effect of roast on bitterness, and the effect of roast on the totality of catechins, the totality of theorubicins, and other important elements within the tea liquor. I have never seen, to the best of my memory, a study which specifically says, well, in this type of a varietal, you'll get X amount of zinc and X amount of selenium. But I'm imagining that those things exist. I just either have skipped over them or just haven't happened to wander onto them. So, because so much is now being done to try and figure out. And so what the chemical constituents are. Why is so much being done? Because there is this question of what is the relationship between what I drink and what my body needs? How am I going to benefit health-wise? What things for what conditions will be useful for this varietal or this category of tea versus another category? So we're seeing a ton of studies vis-a-vis that. And sometimes they're a little contradictory. And so the result is I try to be careful in what I bring to you and try and bring you stuff where I've seen the same result 3 or 4 times. And that's why in terms of I'm sure that the questioner is right at their starting point. In other words, obviously the soil that a plant grows in is going to have some effect on the end result, whether it's a vegetable, whether it's a tea, whether it's a grain. There is going to be some end result. Again, there's not enough studies that I've seen. And again, for tea, they don't usually start at that point, but I'll do some more looking. Great question.
Another taster is finding that the tea, you said tea leaves, Kathy, but I think maybe tea liquor is coating her tongue.
Tea liquor coating the tongue. And it really coats my tongue as well. I was waiting for this comment because this is dense. And I think one of the reasons right away, do you notice how fast you came to impressions about this tea? You all came incredibly fast. Well, one of the reasons you came so fast to impressions is because of the thickness and the viscosity of this tea. So it leaves a strong impression on the tongue. And so the result is you're picking these things up quickly, and as the tea cools, you'll pick up even more.
Something else on aroma is just that in the heating of the tea leaves, another participant found that she got roastiness out of it, which made her anticipate its deliciousness as a Wulong.
Great comment. I knew we were going to hear more about the roastiness because this commentator said right away they detected a roastiness and therefore in the aroma, and therefore knew that they were going to enjoy this tea. And the skill, Remember, I said they go through 20 odd steps. Think about that. Out of those 20 odd steps, what percentage of those? And now this is a trick question because some of you are going to say, well, that's odd. What percentage related to what? Number of steps, time of steps? So that's a false question. So let me back it up. How many times do they roast a tea like this? They roast it at least 3 times. This is a heavier roast tea. Generally speaking, outside of cliff teas, do you get anything that's roasted more than once? Not usually. And this is roasted at least 3 times over a 3-month period. And so there's 2 items. And the last time I talked about a cliff tea, which was the Mountain Orchid, I mentioned these 2 items. So I'll repeat them. The person who's in charge of, in quotes, making the leaf, and the person who's in charge of roasting, those are usually 2 different people, are considered the key people in terms of a final outcome. Why? If you over roast, you don't get all these other wonderful flavors, or they're muted. Are the flavors muted? Is chocolate muted? Absolutely not. Is sweetness muted? All of you have proven it's not muted because you all led with those. And the roast is an afterthought in a way. That's because this roaster was extremely skillful. They understood with this varietal, okay, I'm gonna roast 3 times over a 3-month period. It's gonna be this temperature. I gotta detect this type of aroma. This is a very complicated process. And these individuals who are in charge of that part of the process frequently, outside of the industry, tea industry, don't get enough credit. But that's one of the reasons this is so wonderful. Yes.
A couple commenters note that the roastiness seems tied with astringency on the tongue, one down the middle of his tongue, another just across all of the top of the tongue.
So roastiness and astringency seem to be tied together in this one. For one of the commentators, right down the middle. For the other, all over the tongue. Good comment. For me, I get it more in the middle back of the tongue for me. But again, everybody is going to be different with this. So comment is very good. And there's clearly some astringency, especially at the beginning. As this cools down, that astringency seems to wash away. It declines. Yes.
Mouthfeel is smooth with a tingle like that from a dark chocolate, 80%, on my tongue. Tingle on the tongue like with dark chocolate.
Mouthfeel is smooth. It leaves a tingly feeling on the tongue like an 80% dark chocolate. And the reason I like this comment is because identifying that tingly part, I do get that tingly part. I wouldn't have used those words, but now that I've heard it, it's exactly the right words to describe the feeling that I have on my tongue. Yes.
A taster finds this continues to dry his tongue for a time after a sip.
This continues for this particular commentator to dry his tongue after a sip. So some of these cliff teas really do have that long-lasting dryness. And it turns out, for me, usually the more viscous it is, the more that dryness will stay on my tongue. And even as I've been talking to you, that dryness is still strongly on my tongue.
The taster says if she weren't sensitive to caffeine consumed at night, she'd love to have this tea before bedtime because it's so delicious, calming, and relaxing. It could substitute for the square of dark chocolate she usually has after dinner.
A commentator is making a comment about if this weren't caffeinated, then it would be much easier to think about drinking this at night and having this as a substitute for the square of dark chocolate that the commentator has at night. And yeah, What this is really saying is that there is a ton of flavor in this. This is not thin at all. This has a lot of stuff going on with it. Yes.
Halfway down the cup, the sweetness and the roastiness are balancing.
Great comment, great catch. So halfway down the cup, sweetness and roastiness all of a sudden are becoming balanced. And that's, again, what's special, and that's what the tea master means when she's talking about taste the Wulong. By keeping your attention on what's going on, you get the totality of this tea. If you drink it and say, okay, I understand, and then become involved in other things and just keep drinking relatively quickly, you don't really glom on to all these changes. The Wulongs are fascinating because of all these changes.
A participant says something that harkens, I think, to an earlier umami comment. He says it's almost like having a sheet of seaweed melt on the tongue.
Oh, interesting. Almost like having a sheet of seaweed melt on the tongue. Certainly the melt on the tongue portion of this, I 100% get, because whatever flavors are in my mouth, they do seem to melt into my tongue. For me, the roastiness, the hints of chocolate, and the sweetness outnumber to a degree the umaminess, but I get that umaminess, and it's good to call that out. And the melting, again, is particularly good to call out. Great comment.
Cliff teas like this seem to clear my brain fog.
Ah, cliff teas like this clear this commentator's brain fog. Me too.
Another commentator has a couple comments on infused leaves. She notes the infused leaves slightly opened up after the first brew, and the leaves seem a bit smaller than in the previous Oolong teas we tasted recently, but she can't recall if that was Iron Goddess or Mountain Orchid, where the leaves were bigger.
A great comment. So this commentator talks about two things: size of leaves, and is trying to make a comparison with the previous leaves that we have over the last couple sessions had. And this commentator notes that this is, these leaves are smaller, and they are smaller. They're smaller than both the Mountain Orchid. They're particularly considerably smaller than the White Orchid. And they're also smaller than the Iron Goddess Roasted that we had in the beginning. So in general, this particular varietal is more slow growing, although it is harvested at roughly the same time as Mountain Orchid. Because it's slower growing, the leaves are smaller.
Final comment: infused leaves smell delicious, like roasted dark chocolate melting in the mouth.
Infused leaves smell delicious, like roasted dark chocolate melting in the mouth. And I love this comment because they're, from the start, everybody captured the chocolate, hints of chocolate in this. And it's that hint of dark chocolate. It's the tingling notion of when you have chocolate in the mouth. There is no question that roast and chocolate play this dance within this tea, and that the roaster was skilled enough to allow the chocolate, the hints of chocolate, to dominate. And that's the magic of Northern Tip. Some not so good roasters, when handling this varietal, all you taste is roast. And it just, roast for roast's sake, okay, I guess. But when you have everything else that you have in this, to cover it up with roast is a mistake. And that's usually, so if you are doing cliff teas that aren't from within the mountain or close to within the mountain, many times you'll find those ultra roasted. Why? They're trying to cover up the lack of quality of the tea. Because, you know, if you roast anything enough, all you'll get essentially will be that roastiness. And then you can tell, oh yeah, this is the best. And look at that roastiness. It is really great. And all of you should be thinking to yourself as you're listening to something like that is like, yeah, I get the roastiness. Where's the rest? I want my full money's worth.
For another taster on energetics, he says the flavors and scents of this tea are so bright that he has not noticed the energetics unless the energetics are simple, gentle, and neutral.
Oh, that's interesting. This commentator says that the tea itself is so bright, he hasn't noticed any complex energetics and is assuming, or not assuming, but making the statement probably more simple energetics. And, you know, I agree with that. I do get some energetics on this. And for me, the energetics come late. They don't come in the beginning. And they come to me as warmth. And again, not right at the beginning. You know, some of the teas, you get that energetic, you get that warmth, you get a calmness, you get any one of those feelings real quick. This one, it's all about the flavor in the beginning. And then later on, as you're going through the tea, oh yeah, I am feeling a little warm. That's how it works for me.
The taster is noticing fresh vegetal, this to the scent, and then that malty sweetness you mentioned earlier. Oh, food pairing, please. Sorry.
Okay. Taster is noticing a vegetalness to the scent. And what was the last part of that?
Just that malty sweetness.
Oh, malty sweetness. Yeah. Love that pairing there. And the question that followed was what food pairing would we do for this? So generally speaking, there are 2 times of the day, 2 different circumstances under which I might think of pairing this with something. So for example, if I started off my day with a non-sweet cereal, say oatmeal, or if I started off my day with toast, and even eggs that didn't have a lot of spice or pepper or no cheese in it, this would be a great tea to accompany that. If I have an afternoon event and I'm serving stuff that is, again, more neutral. So think salad without, again, cheese in it, without a heavy dressing. Think fruit salad. And the fruit salad could actually have whipped cream on that. That's not non-sweetened whipped cream would be best. And then to top it off afterwards, to serve this fabulous way to end up a meal. I wouldn't actually serve it with a meal because, again, all of you have noted the chocolate. Well, if you're like me and have no self-control, you have chocolate throughout every meal. On the other hand, when we are doing serious food planning, chocolate's supposed to belong as a dessert. And so that's why I would put this at the end, almost like a dessert for what the meal has been.
Thanks for including this tea after the other Wulongs. The variety of flavors has been enlightening and enhanced my enjoyment of them all. Says one commentator, another agrees. What a delight to explore all the Wulong tea varieties. They're so unique in their own special way.
Oh, well, you're certainly welcome. This was a couple comments about having this set and range of Wulong teas that we explored over the last 4 weeks. We really enjoyed putting this set together, and we knew that most people wouldn't think to put a set like this together. And you're right. The Cliff teas are remarkable And we're just scratching the surface, really, in the range that these things can have. But you did see a very illustrative examples, not just of cliff teas, but in cliff teas in connection with the Anxi teas, the Southern Fujian teas. All right, how are we doing here? Oh my gosh, over talking. This is what happens when I'm unsupervised. And today I had the great pleasure of being unsupervised and spending the time with you. Next week, it's a little bit special because we're going to be doing Heavenly Arrow. Heavenly Arrow is a fermented tea that is not a pour, so it's very unusual. So have a great week, stay safe, be healthy, and we'll see you next Saturday. Y'all take care now.
Bye.
Bye-bye.